one thing I wanted to talk about is that it's really difficult for people to understand all the different types of immigration statuses in the United States. And there are many, many, many of them. So what I wanted to do was talk to you about the immigration status process. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with two ends of that process, the two opposite ends of that process. So you're going to come up first, and the first person who's going to come up is going to be at the end where there's no status at all. So you're going to be down here. And does anybody know what the best way to describe somebody with no status in the United States might be? So a person who's undocumented is a person who came into the country without documents, undocumented, and that could be either by crossing a border, a Canadian border, a Mexican border. It could be by flying into the United States and maybe presenting something like a false document, and that gets you in. Or it could be that you enter the country lawfully, but then you overstay your visa. So this is an undocumented person. He or she either came in without documents or came in with documents and then stayed longer than they were supposed to stay. Okay, so what about this end? What's the end what's the strongest status you can have in the United States? The strongest status is U.S. citizenship, and there are basically 2 or 3 ways to get that. The most common way is you're born here, right? You can actually be born to U.S. citizen parents outside the United States, and you're also a citizen. But the most common way, were you born here? Doesn't matter. If you're born in the United States, you're automatically a citizen. And then there's another way to there's a couple of tricky ways besides that, but I'm not going to talk about those. What's the other way you can get citizenship? The actual immigration status that you need, you always have to have in order to get citizenship is permanent residency. So lawful permanent residency is also commonly referred to as the green card. The reason it's called the green card is because many, many years ago, Congress said that non-citizens had to register in the United States to show that they were here. And you know where they registered? At the post office. And they registered on this little green card. But over the years, now it's got holographs and it's not green, it's pink. But permanent residency, who's my next volunteer? Permanent residency is the status that you have to have before you can be a citizen. Does anybody know how long you have to have it before you can apply for citizenship? 5 years. If you got it by marriage to a U.S. citizen, what you mentioned before, you only have to wait 3 years. But almost everybody has to have this status for 5 years, and then once they have it, they can apply for citizenship, and if they get citizenship, they have that sort of the highest status. And what can you do with citizenship that you can't do with anything else?
Vote.
Pardon me?
Vote.
Vote, right. You can't vote unless you're a citizen. There's some other things you can't do unless you're a citizen. Maybe president, certain positions in the government, you have to be a citizen. Some jobs, actually, you have to be a citizen. They require it. But generally, the most common one is voting. So how do you get to permanent residency? So in between permanent residency and undocumented, there are many, many, many types of status. Can anybody think of any other type of status somebody might have besides permanent resident, undocumented, and citizen? Ways people come into the country? Student visas, work visas. How about a tourist? That's the most common one, right? So relative to undocumented, a tourist is about here. A work visa is about here. And on your arrow, you'll see some sections on the bottom. Some statuses give you a path to citizenship. So you come in, or you get a particular status granted to you, and you can move towards permanent residency, and then when you get permanent residency, you can move towards citizenship. But other statuses in here, it's just a status, and once it's over, you're not going anywhere. A tourist visa, so the embassy abroad will put a stamp in your visa, that's a tourist visa, and it'll usually be valid for 10 years or 5 years.
Oh, really?
That just means you can use it for that long.
That's right.
But when you get to the airport, the immigration service tells you how long you can stay in. So the visa lets you use it for 10 years, but when you get here, they usually give you 6 months. So tourists can usually stay in for 6 months, then they have to leave, and if their visa is for 10 years, they can keep using it, but they're supposed to leave after immigration says they're supposed to leave. It's always stamped in your passport, so it's like laminated in, and it's got holographs on it and stuff, and when you go to the embassy abroad, they seal it into your passport. You have to go to an interview, depending on which type you're applying for.
They're different for different countries.
Yeah, so there's some countries we have so much immigration and tourism from them that they don't even need to have it stamped in. So like if you're coming from France or if you're coming from Italy, certain countries you don't even need to go to the embassy, you just apply online and say I'm coming in and you don't need a visa in your passport. Lithuania was just added, but most countries if you're coming in as a tourist you're going to need a visa. So those are statuses that once you have them and you can keep using them, but they don't go anywhere, okay? Others go somewhere. So the example you gave before when you're married to a United States citizen, if I was the citizen and I'm married to somebody who's not a citizen, I can apply for them. When I apply for them, it moves towards permanent residency. So there's a bunch of papers you file, and if it's granted, my husband will get permanent residency, and then later he can apply for citizenship. What are some other, I'm going to give you another example of a status where somebody can not be a permanent resident and not be undocumented, but they're on a path to citizenship. So somebody who is coming from a war-torn country and applies for refugee status here or abroad, and they come into the United States as a refugee. So somebody coming from maybe Ethiopia or Syrians, there are a lot of Syrians in the United States now who are applying for refugee status. If they get refugee status here, they have it for 1 year, and after 1 year, they can apply for permanent residency. So some have a path to citizenship, some don't. So let's talk about kids your age and what might happen to an undocumented kid who's 17 years old in the United States and came into the country undocumented when they were 4, because that happens very commonly. It's very common with Mexican nationals, but it's common with others too. So what happened is Congress couldn't come up with any law to let these kids get permanent residency. There was an act that was submitted in Congress called the DREAM Act, and so a lot of these kids call themselves dreamers. And that act did not pass. So what happened after that? The same kids and groups that were advocating for them to get some kind of status pressed the administration, the Obama administration, and said, well, there's something you can do. You have to do something. Unfortunately, the executive branch of government can't grant anybody permanent residency. It has to be a law. So what did the administration decide to do? They said, well, we have one thing we can do, and that one thing we can do is we can have them come to our attention and by filing an application, and once we know they're here, we can give them something called deferred action. And what is that? It's way down here on this end. What it is that the government is saying, I know you're here, but I'm not going to do anything to deport you. So you hear of deferred action very commonly now because since Congress couldn't get any law passed, the Obama administration came up with its own plan. So here's the issue. Deferred action for childhood arrivals is called DACA, and it started in 2012, and anyone who entered the country before they were 16 and had lived here since 2007 could apply. And if you get it, you get a work authorization card. So a work authorization card is a big deal because with that, you can get a social security number, you can get a license, you're kind of legal. It's not permanent residency, but it allows you to live and work in the United States, which is a really big deal for somebody who's undocumented. But what happens with DACA is that it's up to the government to decide whether it continues. So you would get your work card for 2 years, and now it's continued another year. The Obama administration extended it. So now you can get another 2 years on your card. But all you're doing is stacking up your cards. So these kids are applying, but they're stacking them up. They're standing in one place, and they continue to work, and they continue to apply, but they're not going anywhere. Only Congress can pass a law to move them this way. So you sort of understand how it works. There are some statuses that move you towards permanent residency and citizenship, and some that give you the right to stay and live here, but don't give you the right to move down the line. And that's what a lot of these students have. So some of the interviews you're going to be doing are people who have lived here all their lives. They might have come in when they were 2 or 3. They've applied for DACA. They've gotten it. Now they're applying a second time. And they're kind of waiting to see whether Congress is going to do anything to maybe make them on a path towards citizenship. A lot of people have said it's a broken system. And it is kind of broken, and it's broken for a bunch of reasons. Remember before you mentioned that if you marry a citizen, you can get your papers. There's also other family members who can apply for their family members to get permanent residency. There's actually 5 categories. The highest category is that you're married to a citizen or you're a citizen and you're applying for your parent, or you're applying for your child outside the country. Maybe you came into work and you eventually got your green card and you have a kid outside, you can apply for your child under 21. For that, there's no limit on how many applications the government can grant each year. But all of the other 4 categories have a maximum, and that maximum is really low, so it gets backlogged. So one category is permanent residents, not citizens, who are applying for their spouses or children. Depending on the country you're from, you might wait 7 or 8 years for your papers to go through. And then other categories are even more backlogged. Like if you're from the Philippines and you're applying for one of your family members, if it's not a spouse, a parent, or a child, you might have a 12 or 15-year wait because there's such a backlog. So that's the problem that people are saying, look, you need to fix this because it's too long a wait for somebody who's so close to you. So there was a piece of legislation that also didn't go anywhere, but it was trying to fix some of those things. So the next question is, will Congress still work to fix it? So what Obama did was, he did the minimum he could do, because Obama can sign a law, but Obama can't make a law. So he's doing what he can do over here, because he can't change anything over there. And if Congress doesn't change anything that he can sign, he can only keep doing these kind of smaller programs that really help people, but it's not going to move them towards anything permanent.
So I listened to a college student who is an undocumented person, and what was interesting is that she had no allegiance to Mexico, to the country that she was born in. Her parents brought her when she was very young into this country, and so it puts you in this funny position because all you know is the life that you've grown up, let's say here in Chicago. You consider yourself an American citizen because you've always lived and gone to school and done everything here, but in the eyes of the law, because you didn't come in legally, you're not considered a legal citizen. And so that's where young people feel very stuck, because it's not like they escaped, or they don't feel like they've escaped because they were so young when they came in that this is all they know. And so it's a very different situation than these adults that are coming in
maybe
a different
they knew they were coming in, they didn't have documents. Right. I mean, there's lots of different reasons why people come to the United States. Some come because they're afraid to stay in their home country. Some come because they can't find work in their home country and they can't feed their family. There are many, many reasons. The people you guys, the 9th graders, are going to be talking to are people who have lived here all their lives. If you really think of this line, moving this line into a circle, you would not be able to tell the difference between a citizen and the kids who have deferred action. They talk and walk and sound just like Americans. They did high school here, they did grade school here. They might follow the same sports teams as you. You can't tell.
And they can even get college scholarships.
Some. One of the biggest issues is state by state. States have to decide whether undocumented kids pay state tuition or out-of-state tuition, which is a big difference. But yes, there are some things they can get. A lot of scholarships, when I was talking before about what can citizens do, a lot of scholarships you have to be a permanent resident or a citizen to get them. You also can't apply, you're not there yet because you're young, but I've got 3 kids in college. You also can't apply for FAFSA, Federal Financial Aid, unless you're a permanent resident or a citizen, or a couple of these over here, which are almost permanent residents. So even though these kids are getting what's called DACA, deferred action, they're not able to apply for most federal aid to go to school. They're not far enough along to be eligible for
So they're
those
stuck.
Well, it's still a big deal. It's a really big deal because the difference between an undocumented kid who has no papers and a kid who has DACA is that the DACA kid can say, okay, now I can work lawfully. I'm going to work 30 hours a week, and I'm going to take 2 classes at community college. Before that, he or she might not even be able to work. A lot of people work undocumented, but generally once you have the card, you can do a lot more. Because if you don't have a social security number, you generally can't work. You got to fill out papers if you're working, and if you don't have a social security number, it's very hard to get a job. So once you get the work authorization card and then you get your social security number, you're home free. So it might be slower. You might have a slower process in your education than maybe a citizen who goes to full-time to college, but it's a lot more than you could do before, and now we're educating people more than what they would have been able to do before.
Is the DACA for like a certain amount of time?
2 years. Well, it's 2 years, And now the president just came out with an extension where you would get it for 3 years. So most people who got it are rolling into their second session. So if everything goes as planned, it will be 5 years, and then they'll keep renewing it. They'll just keep stacking them up unless Congress passes something. However, when the president came out with the newest announcement to extend it for 3 years, 25 states filed a legal case in southern Texas challenging it, saying the president doesn't have the power to do that. He shouldn't be able to do that. So it's very possible that if that case wins and goes national, it might slow down this process or cut out this process. So it's important to know that there are people who are against it as well. Illinois is not. Illinois actually signed a brief that they submitted in the case saying, we're fine with DACA. We don't have a problem with it.
So what happens to a person who's exceeded their limit and can't move any further?
With DACA, for
Yeah.
example, they go back to their undocumented status. So they just fall back into their undocumented
working
status.
anymore.
So let me tell you one more quick thing. Yeah, they have to stop working. They're kind of done. When we first started doing workshops for people who were applying for DACA back in 2012, we had a screening sheet where we asked them a bunch of questions. And there's one of these visas in here, this group that I was talking to you about that can move towards permanent residency. It's called a U visa. And a U visa is a special visa for people who are victims of crimes. So if you're a victim of a serious crime and you report it to the police, you can actually apply for an immigration visa. So when we were interviewing people, we made sure we put that question on. Have you or any of your family members ever been a victim of a crime? And we found that 25 to 30% of the students said yes. So when we found out that they were eligible for something more permanent, we applied for the DACA quickly because that process was really fast. But after that, we actually applied for this other visa, the crime victim visa, because once you get that, you can eventually move down the line. So the answer is that some people don't even know what they're eligible for. They come and talk to a lawyer and they think they're only coming for DACA, but they realize they might be eligible for something else. So screening them and asking them questions is really important. In fact, just quickly, a couple of the people you're talking to in a couple of weeks are in that situation. They have the temporary here, but they're also going to get something permanent because they were victims of crime.
Can you give us an example of how long it takes to move down the line on average, and what percentage never get to move down the line?
So it depends on your status over here. If you're a refugee, you wait a year for permanent residency and then 5 years for citizenship. So it could be 6 years that you're in the United States before you get citizenship. If you're married to a permanent resident, a green card holder, we still use the word green card even though it's not green anymore, it could be your spouse files a petition for you that doesn't give you anything. It just says, yes, we believe this is your lawful spouse. And then you wait about 7 years, if you're from Mexico, about 7 years to get to the application process for permanent residency. So 7 plus 5 is 12, and then citizenship. So you could be married actually to someone who has status here, who's not yet a citizen, and it could take 12 years for you to get your papers. So that's why people say the system's broken. We need to sort of fix some things. The general estimation of the undocumented population in the United States is about 11 million, give or take. The Obama administration has arrested and deported about 400,000 each year for the past 3 years. So it's a lot of people. Most of those people are deported right at the border when they come in. They come in, they get caught, they get sent back. That counts. But a lot of people are caught inside the United States. And there's usually people are not caught. It's not like immigration sort of roves around and looks for people. The most common way people come to their attention is because they get arrested for something. If they get arrested for something and they get convicted, they usually get sent immediately to immigration and they can be deported for that. And while they're arrested, they're held in county jails. So depending on the crime, some crimes, really minor crimes like some kind of traffic ticket, you're usually not turned over to immigration, but more serious crimes you are. Now, the newest, it's called administrative relief when the president comes up with something when it's not a law. The newest addition to administrative relief, it's kind of funny, even we think it's funny, is called DAPA. So there's DACA and DAPA. So DAPA is Deferred Action for Parents of Americans. So if you're the parent of a United States citizen and you were in the United States before 2010, now you can get the same thing the students are getting. This again it's supposed to begin in June. We'll see if any kind of court stuff is going to slow it down. But the administration kind of covered this group as well. You have to have a U.S. citizen child though.